Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1946 Ghost Rockets. The Ghost Rockets, or Spökraketer, of 1946, represent one of the most intellectually fascinating yet frustratingly unsolved mysteries in the history of aerial phenomena. While ufology is often America-centric, the Scandinavian experience in 1946 was the true opening salvo of the modern UFO era, and it scared the geopolitical establishment to death. The timeline, a sky full of invisible missiles. Between May and December 1946, over 2,000 reports were filed across Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland. Witnesses described objects that appeared as rockets, missiles, or torpedoes that would fly horizontally across the sky, sometimes stopping to hover before descending at high speed. Unlike the saucers of 1947, the ghost rockets were almost always described as having a long, cigar-shaped, metallic, or rocket-like appearance. The most chilling aspect was the frequency of reports that these objects crashed into Swedish lakes. Several times, Swedish military divers were sent to the bottoms of lakes, like Lake Kolmjorv or Lake Namajord, to retrieve debris. Lake Kolmjorv is the holy grail of the 1946 Scandinavian Ghost Rocket mystery. It's not just a beautiful spot in the Swedish wilderness. It is the site where military-grade frustration collided with the impossible nature of the phenomenon. To understand why this lake remains a focal point for researchers, you have to look at the bizarre juxtaposition of extreme military diligence versus absolute physical absence. The incident, July 19, 1946. On a clear midsummer day, local residents in the area of Lake Kolmjorv observed a dark cigar-shaped object flying horizontally across the sky. According to multiple witnesses, the object suddenly tipped its nose downward and slammed into the water of the lake with a massive splash. Unlike the other thousands of ghost rocket reports that were just lights in the sky, this was a terminal event. People saw an object enter the water. They saw the impact. They saw the aftermath. The Swedish military, already on high alert due to the hundreds of other rocket reports, treated this as a potential national security crisis. They feared it was a Soviet test flight, perhaps a V-2 variant that had veered off course. They moved in with a level of resources that would be impossible to justify for a weather balloon or a meteorite. Swedish military divers were sent down into the murky, cold depths of Kolmjorv. They searched for weeks. They used the latest sonar and detection equipment available in 1946 to map the bottom of the lake. The area was cordoned off. The military was effectively looking for a Soviet rocket, and they had every intention of dragging it out, disassembling it, and learning its secrets. The empty bottom enigma. After an exhaustive search, the result was a zero. There was no impact crater in the soft silt of the lakebed. An object the size of a V-2 rocket hitting water at high speed must displace an enormous amount of mud and sediment. There was nothing. Divers found no twisted metal, no charred rocket fuel, no electrical components, no rivets. Nothing that suggested an object made of terrestrial materials had ever entered that water. This led to a very uncomfortable conclusion for the military investigators. If the witnesses were telling the truth, and there was no reason to doubt them, then the object they saw hitting the water didn't have the density of a physical rocket. It acted like a localized visual anomaly. Why Lake Kolmjorv remains paranormal? Because the physical search turned up nothing, Kolmjorv transitioned from a military mystery into a paranormal legend. It highlights the most unsettling aspect of the 1946 ghost rockets. They had the appearance of physical rockets, but they lacked the baggage of physical existence. Researchers today look at Lake Kolmjorv and ask, was it a projection? Some researchers have toyed with the idea that the ghost rockets were a mass psychotronic or holographic projection designed to test how a population would react to an aerial threat. Is it transmedium? Others suggest the objects are transmedium, meaning they can switch between different states of matter or dimensions, allowing them to pass through water as if it were air, leaving no physical displacement behind. The failure at Lake Kolmjorv served as a major turning point for how the Swedish government handled the ghost rockets. They realized that they couldn't catch the phenomenon. If you can't touch it, you can't fight it. And if you can't fight it, you certainly don't want to admit it exists to the public. The military quietly packed up their sonar equipment and left Kolmjorv to the tourists. They realized that the ghosts weren't just in the sky, they were laughing at our inability to find them in the dirt. It remains one of the most chilling empty-handed searches in the history of ufology, proving that sometimes the best way to hide a rocket is to make it disappear before it hits the bottom. Is it the Russians? The ghost rocket wave was a massive headache for the Swedish government. World War II had just ended and everyone was terrified of Soviet expansionism. The Swedish military initially suspected that the Soviets had captured German V-1 or V-2 rocket scientists, Penament experts, and were testing modified superrockets over neutral territory to intimidate the West. The U.S. government was so worried that they dispatched an elite team, including General Jimmy Doolittle, to Sweden. They wanted to know if the Russians had leapfrogged the Americans in rocket technology. After their investigation, the U.S. and Swedish teams concluded that the objects were not Soviet. They determined that no nation on Earth possessed the technology to fly objects that could hover, change direction, and vanish into water without leaving wreckage. Why they weren't just rockets. If you dig into the Swedish military files, which were eventually declassified in the 80s, the descriptions become truly bizarre. Pilots in the Swedish Air Force reported chasing these objects. They consistently noted that the rockets would fly against the wind, turn at 90-degree angles, and then accelerate to speeds that no V-2 rocket could ever hope to achieve. Some witnesses heard a humming sound, while others noted they were perfectly silent. Some described them as looking like a cigar with light trailing from the end, while others said they looked like metal balls of light. The fact that thousands of people saw them crash, yet search teams found zero debris, is the smoking gun of the event. It suggests the objects were either holographic projections, interdimensional incursions, or controlled by an intelligence that knew exactly how to gaslight an entire nation's military. Why this matters for ufology? The ghost rockets of 1946 were the test run for the 1947 Kenneth Arnold sighting. If you look at the progression, it's like a transition from a physical manifestation, the rockets, to a more saucer-like appearance, the 1947 wave. The Scandinavian authorities eventually stopped talking about the ghost rockets because they realized that admitting they couldn't control their own airspace was worse than lying. They quietly buried the reports, labeled the crashes as meteorites or illusions, and moved on. The Swedish military's official conclusion? Most reports of ghost rockets are likely due to natural phenomena or misidentifications. It was the birth of the managed ignorance policy that would soon become the global standard. They looked at the evidence, realized they were totally powerless against whatever was visiting their lakes, and decided that the most stable path was to pretend the ghosts were never there. If you ever want to see a government official have a complete and total nervous breakdown, you don't need to leak a classified memo or crash the stock market. All you have to do is show them an object that defies the laws of physics, let them spend millions of dollars trying to recover it, and then have it simply cease to exist when it touches the water. Welcome to the ghost rocket Spökraketer wave of 1946. The moment humanity realized that maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't playing by our rules. Back in 1946, the skies over Scandinavia didn't just have a few stray lights. They were absolutely saturated with thousands of cigar-shaped, metallic-looking rockets. And these weren't shy. They hummed, they glowed, and they performed aerial maneuvers that would make a modern fighter pilot drop their expensive flight suit in terror. But the real comedy, if you can call it that, happened during the splashdowns. Witnesses across Sweden would watch these solid-looking projectiles scream across the sky and slam into lakes like Kolmjorv. Naturally, the Swedish military, terrified that the Russians had accidentally stumbled upon a technology that made the V-2 rocket look like a paper airplane, mobilized a massive recovery effort. They brought sonar. They brought elite divers. They brought enough bureaucracy to fill a stadium. And what did they find at the bottom of the lake? Exactly nothing. No craters. No debris. No oil slicks. No charred metal. It was as if the rocket had decided that being a physical object was just a passing phase and opted to become a ghost instead. This is where things stop being a military mystery and start becoming a physics-defying headache. Since the objects weren't leaving wreckage, we have to stop looking at them as nuts and bolts machines and start looking at them as transmedium phantoms. If a craft is capable of vibrating its molecular structure, effectively tuning its density, then water, soil, or even solid rock isn't a barrier. It's just an inconvenience. In that light, the crash isn't a catastrophic failure. It's a phase shift. It's an exit ramp. The object doesn't hit the water. It just tunes itself to pass through the liquid barrier as if it were air. It's the ultimate out-of-office reply. You don't have to look far to see the same trick performed elsewhere. Look at Mount Aso in Japan. You've got UFOs diving into erupting, molten magma, a medium that would turn a tank into a fondue pot and simply disappearing. Whether it's the freezing waters of a Swedish lake or the incandescent heart of a volcano, the basic principle remains. These craft treat our solid world as if it were a holographic projection. It begs the question, are we looking at physical objects, or are we being subjected to a massive atomic scale projection? If these craft are just high-definition visual illusions, a holographic decoy powered by some unknown energy, then the intelligence behind them is having the time of its life. They get to watch us scramble our jets, deplete our budgets, and send our bravest divers into frozen lakes, all while the source of the craft stays perfectly safe, likely watching the show from a comfortable seat in another dimension. We've spent the last 80 years treating UFOs as a national security threat we can shoot down, recover, and river engineer. We've been trying to bring a screwdriver to a reality hacking knife fight. The Ghost Rockets of 1946 were the ultimate lesson in humility. They taught us that our reality is permeable. The Pentagon can't stamp classified on a file as many times as they want, but it doesn't change the fact that they spent the better part of a century trying to catch atomic ghosts with sonar and good intentions. So next time you see a solid object in the sky, remember Lake Kolmjorv. It might not be a rocket, a saucer, or secret government project. It might just be an exit sign, and we're the only ones who aren't in on the joke. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.